The Transmitter.
After her PhD thesis, for a while Tempest and Avis lived apart. He enrolled at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, a school of about 10,000 undergraduates, but his grades weren't great, Tempest told me. He also attended Madison Area Technical College, sometimes called Madison College, but that did not last either. Out of school, he got a job at Walgreens. Tempest went back to Atlanta with her PhD and looked for her next step, but it was clear Avis was struggling on his own. He had gained a startling amount of weight, for one thing, and Tempest eventually had him move in with his grandfather. Terry had set up a homestead in Finger, Tennessee, a tiny town of less than 300 people, according to the 2022 census. It was mostly a peaceful time for both of them, Avis helping with the orchard with the chickens, and Terry happy for the company of his grandson. And in 2016, Tempest landed a postdoctoral fellowship at Vanderbilt University with the researcher Beth Mallow. Tempest moved to Nashville, found a place to rent south of the city, and eventually moved Avis in. Beth is the Burry Chair in Cognitive Childhood Development and a tenured professor of neurology and pediatrics at Vanderbilt University. She's also director of Vanderbilt Kennedy Center Clinical Translational Core. She grew up on Long Island, New York, earned her Bachelor of Science degree and medical degree from Northwestern University. She is married with 2 children, both boys, both on the autism spectrum. She sings in an a cappella women's group. And she is also moderately active in politics. In 2022, she testified before Congress in her capacity as a sleep researcher, highlighting the adverse health effects that come with abruptly changing the daylight savings time every March. But she has also been active in the organization Braver Angels, which helps foster communication between groups that are politically polarized. And she co-moderated a civil discourse group in Nashville. In other words, she seems to be someone who prefers that people get along. And it was Beth Mallow's research that got Tempest interested in working at Vanderbilt. Tempest saw a job posting for a research associate to study transition, employment, and youth with disabilities at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center in Nashville. And she applied. It seemed like a perfect fit.
The description of the job was to optimize outcomes in autism, which is hilarious. It was like written into the description on all of my CVs and everything that I was sending out and resumes. That what I wrote as my mission was optimizing outcomes in adults on the autism spectrum. And so I contact them. I have this great initial interaction. They're very excited.
When Tempest arrived at Vanderbilt, she looked to help with Beth's research. Given Beth's deep background in sleep, Beth wanted, Tempest said, to examine why young adults with autism exhibited a higher rate of troubled sleep after leaving high school. And she had come up with a plan to get these young adults out into the community. Trips to the zoo, for instance, 5 days a week for 5 weeks to see if their sleep improved because of their increased activity. Tempest could not see the sense in that. What, she wanted to know, was the change mechanism to be measured at the end. The more Beth tried to explain it, the less Tempest understood, until she began to have terrible flashbacks, she said, to her first months at the University of Wisconsin-Madison when she'd felt so out of place. This went on, Tempest says, until they got into a big argument about it, and Tempest said something that walked the line between hostility and insubordination.
I don't know what I said. I remember right after I said it, wishing I had not said that, seeing the look on Dr. Mallow's face and walking out of that meeting thinking, I should probably start repacking my stuff.
I reached out to Beth for her side of the story. In the end, she did not participate, and I'll get back to that later. But Beth was able to look past this first conflict. The way Tempest understood it, Beth had taken the argument to be proof that Tempest was clearly invested in the issue. In the coming years, they published one paper together titled Appropriateness, Acceptability, and Feasibility of a Neurodiversity-Based Self-Determination Program for Autistic Adults. From 2016 to 2022, Beth was listed as an author on dozens of papers, according to the NIH's National Library of Medicine's PubMed database. Those papers mostly were in sleep. When I checked, her paper on parent-based sleep education for children with autism spectrum disorders had been cited 220 times. Her paper, Characterizing Sleep in Children with Autism Spectrum Disorders, a Multidimensional Approach, had been cited 420 times. Meanwhile, Tempest was still early in her career. She published a paper arguing that autistic individuals face stigma that can influence how they identify, and another article that in part investigated a lost generation of autistic people who were under-identified because of changes in the criteria for diagnosing autism. So Beth had a lot of experience studying sleep, sometimes from a biological angle, and Tempest was investigating issues around autistic identity. Both women were, and are, deeply invested in the lives of autistic people. Both have children with autism. But Tempest took more of a neurodiversity-focused, activist approach in her research, she said, and that contributed to tension between the two. My name is Brady Huggett, and this is When Autistic Kids Grow Up. Chapter 3. Would There Be Data? Part of an academic's life is winning grant money. Tempest had won the small NIH grant that Morton Gernsbacher had nominated her for, but now she needed to win funding at Vanderbilt. In 2017, Tempest and Beth applied for as many as 8 grants through the NIH and other funding institutes, and Tempest received a K-12 Mentored Career Development Award from that effort. The grant came from the NIH and was designed to offer 3 years of funding in total. And she was looking for more, but not getting it.
But everybody keeps telling me it's my grantspersonship. I just need to work harder, try harder. I can't figure it out.
She applied for the Programs to Increase Diversity Among Individuals Engaged in Health-Related Research, otherwise known as PRIDE. They provided her with a small grant. In order to qualify for that grant, which is also supplied by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, the proposed work must consider the heart, the lung, blood, or sleep disorders in some way. Given that Tempest wanted to study sleep disturbances in autism, her fit with the grant seemed clear. But the PRIDE group got resistance from the NIH, she said.
So they go to get my small research project funded, small amount of money, tiny amount of money for this project. And they get pushback from NHLBI, who says, this is autism, this is developmental disabilities.
The NHLBI seemed to be saying that the kind of autism research Tempest wanted to do fell under another institute, maybe something like the National Institute of Mental Health. Tempest saw it another way, which is that the National Center on Sleep Disorders Research is housed within NHLBI, and therefore the institute supports sleep research. To exclude autistic people from sleep studies at NHLBI just because of their autism diagnosis, in her mind, was discriminatory.
I had an epiphany overnight that it's discrimination. And I wrote this very long email to the 2 co-directors of the PRIDE program, to my research mentor, who was also my direct supervisor, the division chief of the department at Vanderbilt, and to the PI of the grant that I was on, that K-12. And then also to my former mentors, Colleen Moore, a couple other people. And I'm writing to all of them to say, I think this is discrimination.
This email blast did not go over well with everyone. In part of her long email, she told me, Tempest quoted an email from the person inside the PRIDE program who did not appreciate having their private correspondence sent to others. Some read the long, strident email and reached out to Tempest to ask if she was okay, she told me. Beth Mallow emailed to sympathize with Tempest, calling her findings frustrating, but also saying that she wouldn't call it discrimination. The real issue, Beth felt, was the way in which Tempest was trying to fit her research goals inside the various pillars of the NIH. Beth had been in the autism field for more than 17 years at that point, and she had encountered similar challenges while trying to find a home for her sleep autism work, she said. Others on the email chain echoed that statement. Sunil Kripalani, a professor and director of the Center for Health Services Research at VUMC, among other titles, wrote that he was also of the opinion that the problem of fit is largely one of institute priorities. Innovative work, he said, often lies at the margins of the defined boundaries. and he felt the challenge of pitching her research ideas is a broader one related to grantsmanship. If seeking grants at NHLBI, he said, it might be more strategic to focus on the need to adapt a sleep-related intervention such as cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia for special populations. Autism serves as a good model for study, he wrote, but it might be better to frame the work with broad relevance. But Tempest wasn't able to simply put aside this thing that I found, she told me. She converted the email into a letter and sent it off to members of the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, or IAC, a federally funded committee that provides recommendations to the Secretary of Health and Human Services around autism initiatives. She heard nothing back, she said, and she also reached out to the Kennedy Children's Center, which focuses on young children with developmental delays. Mostly what Tempest got for this effort, she said, was pushback.
And I was told, don't use such strong language. Don't talk about discrimination. Don't use the word discrimination. It's funding policies. And they would say, don't use the term eugenics. No one at the NIH is going to believe that they're doing eugenics. If you use this, you're just going to shut the conversation down. All these things will just shut the conversation down.
Yet Tempest wanted no part of watering down the message, she said, even though she could sense that the more she talked about it, the more it seemed to be straining relationships. She began to bring it up less, until she had a conversation with Nancy Cheek Zamora, an autism researcher and professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Nancy told her, basically, that if she thought there was a problem, she ought to go get proof. Here's Nancy.
It's been years, right, since we had that conversation, but we discussed, would there be data there to substantiate this claim? Is there evidence that there are these gaps in funding, and that, in sort of general terms, that we're all getting the runaround that are doing this work with autistic adults, and particularly related to physical health.
So Tempest began a project looking at NIH funding for research into autistic adults, and the data would eventually fuel her NIH funding gap paper. One of the other things Tempest did at Vanderbilt was start her own virtual lab. She called it Spectrum for Life, and it focused on examining how the huge combination of strengths and co-occurring conditions make up multiple autisms. Also, the lab looked at how financial, social, and health issues, among other things, could help or prevent autistic flourishing. Tempest's bio for her lab website lays out her background and identity. It stated that she is neurodivergent, multiracial, and queer. She has been in relationships with women, that she has autistic family members, that her mother had been an immigrant, and that she herself was first to college in her family. She wrote that she'd been impoverished and lived through housing insecurity, among other things. This was Tempest's way of planting a flag. And so maybe it's no surprise that the folks who joined her lab had backgrounds that resembled some of what Tempest had lived through. Most of the members have been female. Some had an autism diagnosis, some were first to college or from lower-income families. Jordan Walkingstick, for instance, made her way to Vanderbilt through Quest Bridge, a program that connects high-achieving high school students from low-income families to 52 college partners. She joined the Spectrum for Life lab. Also in the lab was Audrey Scudder, who had been a self-described science, math-orientated type person in high school. She received an ADHD diagnosis back then, she said, but in college she mentioned to a therapist that she had no idea how to navigate everyday social situations, and her therapist alertly recommended Audrey be evaluated for autism. Her diagnosis, Audrey said, helped her family understand each other better and opened her father's eyes to his own likely neurodivergence. It also brought a newfound interest in autism for Audrey. When she applied to join Tempest's lab, she mentioned that she'd recently gotten an autism diagnosis. In the interview process, it became clear to Audrey that Tempest was hoping to get people with autism lived experiences into the lab and was genuinely excited about this characteristic of Audrey's.
It was one of the first very positive reactions I'd had to telling someone about that, so I think that immediately put us off on the right foot.
It was Audrey that Tempest turned to when Tempest began looking for data to support the idea of the NIH discriminating against autistic adults. Tempest used the NIH's reporter database to search for all autism-funded research since 1985. She then searched for the key terms autism and adult, along with 30 specific health conditions that occur at higher rates in autistic adults as identified in 2015 by the researcher Lisa A. Krohn and colleagues. That included sleep disorders, obesity, gastrointestinal issues, and central nervous system disorders. That turned up 99 grants. And then they went into the abstracts.
She had like a Word doc that had a list of all the grants that had come up in the searches. And then my job basically was going back through all of that data, formalizing it a bit more, putting things into definite categories, going back through all of the abstracts, looking for exactly how involved like autistic adults were in the sample. And then, just making a spreadsheet, keeping notes on everything, and, making a tally of the different types of grants we found in our searches.
They found that some of the 99 grants were being applied to various conditions. Just 61 were unique grants. 49 of those, however, either did not include cognitively able autistic adults in the study's target population or didn't clearly describe them as part of the population. That dropped the grants to 12. But 6 of those grants, they found, were not exclusively focused on autistic adults. They were dropped from the tally. 2 more were not focused on physical health and were also dropped. Of the 4 remaining, 3 were scraping databases for insight into health conditions for autistic adults, and the final one focused on understanding age-related neuromotor impairments in autistic adults. This meant that none of the grants for cognitively able autistic adults, they wrote, focused on improving the relevant health disparity condition through intervention, programs, or services. That's the path the paper took to get its 0. Meanwhile, even as Tempest worked on the paper, tension grew between her and Beth about the framing of the research. The way Tempest tells it, in the beginning of January 2022, when she was researching the NIH funding gap paper, she met with Beth Mallow to talk about the upcoming year. The global pandemic, which began in earnest in the United States in early 2020, had upended research. Tempest was able to win an extension on her K-12 grant, which bought her some time, but she needed new grants to keep funding her work. Tempest assumed that her meeting with Beth would be about her plans to earn grant money, but that's not what she found.
And we met, and I got broadsided by that conversation because instead of talking about what we're going to be doing in that meeting, she's talking about, you're not going to be writing any grants this year. And I'm asking her why, and she goes, you will not be renewed. And I asked her why. And then we got into a conversation. I asked her specifically, is this about the NIH thing? And she was, yes, this is about the NIH thing. I'm very uncomfortable with it.
For months, the concept of discrimination within the NIH had sat between Beth and Tempest. It often arose during their daily interactions and injected tension into their relationship, Tempest said, though Tempest tried to move past it.
And I said very explicitly to her in several meetings, let's just not talk about that. It's not necessary for us to talk about that. I'm doing that research. I'm doing it on my own. I'm analyzing the data. It's not, we don't need to talk about it. And we don't have to agree.
But the issue kept coming up. Partly that was because Tempest was presenting her research at poster sessions at Vandy or at Science Day at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. In the January 2022 meeting, Beth spoke kindly and patiently, Tempest said. But still, Tempest left the meeting feeling that she herself was the problem. Eventually, she came to a kind of acceptance. In an email on February 2, 2022, Tempest wrote to Beth that she just wanted to say once again how much I appreciate your mentorship over the last 5 years, going on 6. When I first arrived into town, I had imagined that I would only be staying for 2 years in the postdoc position before moving on. I had no idea how much I would learn and grow within that postdoc position, nor how wonderful and deep my relationships would become with you, Debbie, Lydia, Lana, and so many others. I was humbled and grateful for your efforts to help me secure grants and pursue my career in research at VUMC. You went above and beyond to help me again and again. I could not have been luckier than having you as my mentor. Tempest added that she must admit that I was sad to hear that my efforts to whistleblow systemic discrimination for cognitively able autistic adults at the NIH, as I see it, certainly this is not how you would characterize the policies of the NIH, has led to our irreconcilable differences, as you put it, that bar mentorship. I feel this as a great loss, but would never want us to interact in ways that would make you uncomfortable. She went on, I hope that, mentorship aside, that we will be able to continue our relationship in new ways in the future, perhaps as collaborators. In any case, you have my deepest respect, gratitude, and friendship. Beth's response was every bit as warm. The feeling is mutual. You are amazing, TA, such a disciplined scientist and so creative. RE the NIH situation, I would look at it as you are ready to be independent, including having your own independent perspectives. I don't want to hold you back in any way from doing what you feel is right because of my own beliefs, and I am open to collaborating in the future if the opportunity arises. When she's being contemplative, Tempest has some guesses on other issues that came between her and Beth at Vanderbilt.
She brought me on to a project with other people, and I oftentimes have difficulty with the language that's used in that other research, and I speak up about it. I'm very clear when I'm talking about language that can be stigmatizing or potentially detrimental to the population. I work very hard not to be rude about it, and I work very hard to find solutions in ways that we can find a middle. But I think it makes me potentially a little more difficult in some of those collaborations, to be honest.
For example, some researchers use words like autism spectrum disorder or ASD in papers. Tempest and many in the autistic community prefer a term like autists, though there was other paternalistic and condescending language used in research circles, she said, aimed at autistic people. But she also felt friction stemming simply from their different backgrounds. Tempest had grown up autistic, and she had come through, at times, dire financial troubles. She understood firsthand what it felt to be marginalized. Yet most of the researchers she worked with, including Beth, were more aligned with family members of autistic people rather than the autists themselves, Tempest told me. And this, she told me, compelled Tempest to press against this culture constantly, which created tension.
She viewed what I did as activism, and she was against activism because she believed activism undermines incremental change. And I said to her, I felt like that statement is exactly correct. And the point of activism is to accelerate change, because incremental change, causes harm. And she and I would get into long debates over like that.
Losing her position had Tempest wallowing, she said. Through all this, she had the added pressure of caring for her father. Back in 2012, Terry McDonald decided he would be a writer. He was running an appliance shop at the time in Atlanta. He quit the job, sold everything in his life he could on Craigslist, packed up the rest in his truck, and then camped out in a wildlife refuge area in Georgia. He fished in the morning, and he wrote in the afternoons and night, using his truck battery to power his desktop computer. Over the next 4 months, he wrote his first book, titled Hard Road, which was very much in the dystopian genre. He self-published it on Amazon. Later, he moved to Finger, the tiny town in Tennessee where he built himself a homestead and where Avis lived for a while. Terry planted an orchard of fruit trees, and he went off the grid. Solar panels for power, no running water. He wrote maybe another 6 or 7 books there, and self-published those on Amazon too. He built up a bit of a following and told me he'd made a good bit of money from those books. It was a peaceful time, until 2018.
I woke up one morning down Finger and went to pee against a tree, and all I peed was blood. And I went, wow, so I got online and figured out I had bladder cancer. So I came up to the VA up here, and yes, they found the bladder cancer, but they said they couldn't operate on me for that because my heart was bad, and they had to operate on my heart before they could do anything about the bladder cancer.
Terry moved in with Tempest in Nashville to await his surgery. The roles had flipped since she was a child. Now she was the breadwinner, and Terry would be the one who needed care. He had the heart surgery, a replacement valve, and a couple of bypasses, he told me. and then suffered through an arthritis flare-up after his successful cancer treatment that left him temporarily nearly immobile. In late 2021, Tempest had closed on a condo not far from the rental she'd been living in, and Terry and Avis moved there with her. So when Tempest's position at Vanderbilt was not renewed, it tightened her worry over her financial responsibilities, and it infected her psyche in other ways, too. It felt like, you got these glowing reviews, so it didn't feel like a rejection of your work, but more like a rejection of you. Is that what you mean by, like, you felt this sort of shame? Beth was like, I don't want to work with you anymore.
I felt that's it. I felt rejected by her.
And then, as she was winding down her time at Vandy, she came to believe that Beth had not gone through the proper channels in closing her position. And she filed a charge of discrimination against Vanderbilt with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That's next time in Chapter 4. When Autistic Kids Grow Up was written and produced by me, Brady Huggett. Editing by Ivan Aransky and Paige Miranda. Art commissioned by Rebecca Horn. Music and audio engineering by Sam Schumann. Go to the podcast page of thetransmitter.org to see photographs for this chapter and for a PDF transcript. Thank you.